Chapter 21. Terrace, Houses of Parliament, Saturday the 2nd of June, 2463. In a time of universal deceit, telling the truth is a revolutionary act. George Orwell, 1903 to 1950. They don't look very appreciative of what I've laid on for them, grumbled Lal, taking a glass of wine from one of the waiters. He grimaced. Ugh, it's warm. Guppy slapped him on the back. My old friend, what do you expect? Having stabbed you in the back, I would consider it the height of bad manners if they were to come over and then compliment you for the spread and entertainment. As the person here who's known you the longest, I suggest for tonight at least. He raised his hand to stop Lal interrupting. Forget your bane, Dr. Chang, and enjoy this evening for all it's worth. He looked at the doctor, who was decidedly glum. Come on, let's raise our glasses. To the future. The future, echoed Lal, with little enthusiasm, only sniffing his glass and looking for a passing waiter to exchange it. His mind was still weighed down from his meeting with Andy that morning. The divers, the skull, Phaeon. He had shared what had happened with Guppy, but his old friend could shed no new light on the matter. There were all of 170 guests on the terrace to celebrate the final evening of the delegation. London had not witnessed such festivities for nigh on 4 centuries. 20 suckling pigs were being roasted. Tables were laden with foods, while uniformed waiters meandered among the guests with drinks and titbits in the honeyed light of a long English summer evening. 2 barges, festooned with bunting, were moored close to the terrace, the first full of musicians and singers dressed in Tudor costumes, while the other had a troupe of acrobats plus a fire-eater. Huddled together, on a separate table, were a number of ladies of dubious virtue, with their painted faces and cheap perfume, there for the comfort of the delegates afterwards. Guppy, who's that fellow there? Where? There, by the doorway, the big Chinese chap. Keeps looking in this direction. He pointed. See? He's now seen me noticing him. He's turning away. Guppy searched the crowd. When I see Andy with his lady friends, I'll ask him. Noticed he wasn't drinking, said Lal. Always be suspicious of someone who doesn't drink. They're hiding. Doctor? Doctor? They turned around. It was Bee. Hello, Bee. He stepped back and looked her up and down. You look wonderful, like a butterfly this evening. He had rarely seen her out of her workaday dun-coloured clothes which she usually wore. She had changed into a long, if somewhat dated dress which nevertheless did justice to her cleavage. She was attractive, even sexy. He wondered why she hadn't yet married. She laughed nervously and stroked his arm. Thank you. You're so kind. Hello, Guppy. She glanced about the guests, brushing a strand of hair from her face. Isn't the evening going well? Glad you think so, he replied, casting a last look over to where the man had been loitering. He was no longer there. She picked up on his dejected mood. Now, I'm not going to allow you to behave like that, she scolded. Stop feeling sorry for yourself and go and talk to Dr. Chan and the others. You've been deliberately ignoring them all week and leaving it all to Guppy. Lal felt stung by her reproach, all the more so because it was true. His manners had been bad. Look at them. They hardly seemed to be enjoying themselves either. He turned his head to where Chang, Xiang, and a clutch of delegates were standing about with long faces. He caught Chang give them a fleeting sideways glance. See, pressed Bee. He's embarrassed. As well he should be. Go over to them, make a few toasts. Live and let live, I say. All right, he said resignedly. But before I do, I need a fresh one. He hailed a passing waiter and took the glass with the most condensation on. To you, he raised it, pulling a lopsided smile. She who must be obeyed. Bee beamed back, broadly and warmly. Wan Shan Hao, Wan Shan Hao. Good evening, gentlemen, good evening, Lal boomed as he approached the group. How are we all, then? Trust you're enjoying the food, the wine? He gestured towards the river. The entertainment, and I hope you'll enjoy the, He gave them a wink. Despite his enforced bonhomie, he was met by 1 or 2 grudging platitudes and downcast looks. Pushing into their circle, he raised his glass up to Chang's. Ganbai! Chang returned a joyless smile. Lal went around the small circle with his typical style, clinked his glass with theirs. From the corner of his eye he caught a glimpse of B gazing on proudly. Yet when he raised his glass to toast each delegate, he was met with sullenness, particularly from Jian. "Dr. Lal," said Chang, taking his arm and guiding him away from the group. "May I have a private word with you?" Surprised, Lal complied. Once a few paces from the others, Chang turned to him and said, "You have powerful friends." Lal perceived a glint of respect, even fear in his eyes. "I underestimated you." "Underestimated me? Powerful friends? Please tell me what you mean." He saw Chang's jaw muscles tighten. "I think you know very well what I mean." He broke eye contact and stared at the ground. Yesterday, the WAC received a message from NUNDA that if they wish to continue to be funded by the Foundation, then there must be no change in your status as director of the London project. Lal's mind was reeling, but he maintained his composure. The WAC could not operate without funds from the Foundation. "So when did you hear this?" "This morning." The new United Nations Department of Antiquities. Lal no longer knew anybody of any importance at Nunda, and certainly not in the Foundation. And how did they know he was going to be replaced as director? He decided to bluff it out. "Well, I suppose you are aware of my family's background, aren't you?" Chang lowered his head and nodded. Lal didn't want to give anything away, but he needed answers. "So, who informed you?" "The President." "The President of Nunda?" "No, the President of the NUN," answered Chang flatly. "The President of the new United Nations?" Lal hoped his outburst did not give away his astonishment, but Chang appeared not to notice. The President of the NUN was an African, Jacob Sotosi. Like most of the previous presidents, Lal despised him. He had a reputation for corruption and nepotism which went far beyond acceptable graft. This once venerable institution, which had done so much over the past 200 or so years to keep the flame of civilization flickering, was now drowning in greed. "Well, you know how it works, Dr. Chang. Wheels within wheels." He knew the statement sounded banal, but he couldn't think of anything else better to say. After a moment's reflection he added, "So how do you see, then, the future of the project?" Chang pursed his lips. "I suppose it means there will be no change to what there was before." "The status quo ante, then?" "Yes, if you say so." "And what about you?" He wondered if Chang or Xiang might have had a change in their positions. "I haven't heard anything." Chang clearly felt chastened, if not threatened, by the turn of events. "But one more thing. I was told you should expect a journalist to arrive soon." "A journalist? What sort of journalist?" "She works for the Foundation." "She works for the Foundation?" He could not help but sound surprised. For a second, Lal wondered if Chang might begin to question just how much he really did know about what was going on. Why a journalist, for heaven's sake, and why a woman to boot? "Yes, of course," he said. "I've been feeling unwell lately, haven't had a chance to keep up with my correspondence." Chang gave a dismissive shrug. "All I know is that you must extend to her your full cooperation." He couldn't care less about the journalist. He was thinking, how could this absent-minded sot have the guile to have pulled so many strings as to get the president of the NUN to intervene on his behalf? He cursed that the man standing before him had descended from privilege, whereas he had risen from generations of kowtowing bureaucrats. His career had been all about trying to move closer to the center of the circles of power, the Jingying, the elite. He might then earn the coveted life extension for himself and his family. When planning how he was going to oust Lal, he had weighed up all the possible reactions and consequences. Nowhere in his calculations had he anticipated such a turn of events. Not wanting to leave relations with Chang sour, Lal said, "I know you must be disappointed with how things have turned out, but you must understand, I have given many years of my life to restore the city and spent most of my inheritance on it too. And let's be frank, being sidelined by you was unfair at best." As he said this, he gripped Chang's arm and held his gaze, but Chang could only lower his. "Yet you can take it from me that I have not mentioned anything which might be construed as negative against you to the NUN, and nor will I as long as we continue to have a good and collaborative relationship." Chang looked up, nodded, and Lal extended his hand. He shook it limply, another gesture of capitulation. Then Lal, gesturing at the crowds who were starting to mill around the barbecue, said, "Now why don't we enjoy the evening and start on some of that suckling pig?" He led Chang and his group into the throng, hoping his stride would not appear too triumphant, nor his demeanor too gleeful. Face was important. Chang had lost face, a lot of face. Handing them platters, chopsticks, and spoons, he ushered them to the front of the line and made a point of ordering the chefs to slice the best cuts for them, insisting that the servers load up their plates. He then found them a table and, clicking his fingers, made sure beers and wines were immediately served. Once they were settled, Lal excused himself and searched for Guppy. He found him sitting, stuffing a rice ball into his mouth, in animated conversation with those around. Lal sidled up and placed a hand on his shoulder, asked to speak with him privately. Excusing themselves from their guests, they took their food and drink to a quiet table behind the aviary. He recounted his discussion with Chang. Guppy, like Lal, was both astonished and delighted. Together they tried to make sense of it all. "He said the president of the NUN? Well, that's what he told me. Why would he make it up? You don't have any powerful friends in the NUN, do you?" The Punjabi tried to chuckle through a mouthful of food. "Wish I did." "I wonder if this too has anything to do with the case Andy brought up. Too much is happening too quickly for it all to be happenstance." "Well, how would they know about that?" He tore a piece of chapati and wrapped it around some vegetables. "But if I were you, I would just count my blessings. I've always told you, you underestimate your reputation." He popped the chapati into his mouth, thinking as he chewed. "And this journalist who's coming, you're sure it's a woman?" "That's what Chang said." Guppy shrugged. "I guess she's come to report back to the Foundation. If I were you, I'd give her the red carpet treatment. Plenty of good stories to go home and write about. When is she due?" "Don't know. He just said, soon."